I am tasked with introducing the speaker. I am not an Indonesianist, so I apologize in advance for any mistakes in pronunciation. And I'm just a lowly sociologist, so what do I know? Anyhow, Yahya Kizbia is a faculty member in the psychology department at the Universitas Muhammadiyah Surakarta, Indonesia. She founded the Center for Cultural Studies and Social Change in 2000 and was its director until 2005. She is currently the chair of the board of directors at the center, and she is a consultant and trainer for various United Nations organizations and NGOs on psychosocial issues of children's well-being, gender equality, and community peace building in conflict-torn areas. Among other things, she is actively involved with the International Committee for the Psychological Study of Peace based in the US and the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies based in Cambodia. She has published books and articles, presented papers in various international conferences, as well as taught in Southeast Asia, the US, and Australia. Her interests center in two areas within social psychology, intergroup relations, and the psychology of peace. She engages in action research aimed to help facilitate positive social transformation, especially in regards to the roles of religion in peace building and coexistence education in divided, plural societies. Ms. Kizbia has a bachelor's degree in psychology from the Universitas Gadjah Mada in Indonesia and a master's degree in community social psychology from the University of Massachusetts, supported by the Fulbright Scholarship. She participated in diploma and certificate programs in conflict resolution and peace studies at the European Peace University, Austria, and Uppsala University, Sweden. She is also a fellow of the UK-based Leadership for Environment and Development LEAD, Cohort 8, with field research in China, Brazil, Armenia, and Russia. She participated in the Fulbright Summer Institute in Boston College and is the recipient of the Future Leader Visitor Award from the French government. Ms. Kizbia is currently finishing her PhD in psychology at the University of Melbourne, supported by the Australian Development Scholarship and the Ford Foundation. And without further ado, I now will have Ms. Kizbia come forward. Thank you.
Very nice introduction, thank you. And you did well with Indonesian pronunciation. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor and pleasure to be here, and I would like to thank the Center for Southeast Asian Studies inviting me here. Especially, I'm thanking Susan Walton, Charlie Sullivan, and also one faculty who is not here. She's in Solo, the city where I live, Ibu Nancy, Florida. We just went through sliding doors. I think I'm in here and she's out of here in my own city in Indonesia. My today's presentation is entitled Peace and Coexistence Education for Indonesian Muslim Students. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Indonesia, but I will just give you some data regarding Indonesia pertaining its plural nature. You have seen Indonesian's location in Southeast Asia, yeah? I think you're familiar. And here, the pictures of 6 faiths and religion acknowledged by Indonesian government: Islam, Christians, consisting Protestant and Catholics, Buddhists, Hinduism, and one more is Confucianism. As you may know, Indonesia is the largest Muslim majority country in the world. It has 242 million population, of which 88% is a Muslim population. And it has approximately 300 ethnic groups with around 600 languages and dialects spoken. So it's a very diverse society, very plural society. Now, people talking about Indonesia as a moderate Muslim majority country, as a tolerant Muslim majority country. Is that true? Largely, it is true. But still, within Indonesian communities, we have occurrences, occasions of violence, of riots based on religious cleavages and ethnic cleavages. For example, in Solo alone, the city where I live, and it's a city which is often considered as a hotspot in Indonesia for being a breeding nest of radicalism, breeding nest of terrorism, among others, because, for example, Abu Bakar Ba'asyir, the Islamic cleric who was accused as being responsible for Bali bombing, lived in there, and also he founded and ran a pesantren, Al Mu'min in Nguruki. So, for examples, in Solo alone, in the last decade, starting from, I'm just citing incidents happening starting from year 2000. Islamic Defender Front, for example, FPI, rejected 6 families who moved into Kejawen by hijacking their mosque. Kejawen is an indigenous faith of Javanese people. The same year, following Israel-Palestine clash, Laskar Islam Hizbullah swooped American guests in various hotels. And also the same year, FPI engaged in vigilante action on places of immorality, for example, bars, gambling, whorehouses. Another year, 2002, among others, Laskar Jihad forced a church conference to move to Jogja City. In 2005, Ahmadiyah members harassed and threatened. Ahmadiyah is considered as a splinter, Islamic sect. They don't recognize Muhammad as the last prophet. They acknowledge there's a prophet after Muhammad named Mirza Ghulam Ahmad from India. And because of this, Ahmadiyya is not seen as Islam. The majority of Muslims see Ahmadiyya as heretic. From 2006 until 2009, Solo has become a base for networks of Southeast Asia most wanted terrorist Nurdin M. Top. He got besieged and shot dead last year. And until now, Solo has been a place where there's an ongoing minimal interaction between communities of different faiths and ethnicities. And one of these, the reason why is because, for example, if you're familiar with Solo, Susan Walton would be, you can see that various mosques deliver inflammatory speeches. But not only mosques, churches as well do the same. So when I talk about Solo as being a segregated city, it's not only the responsibility of Muslim, but also the responsibility of members of other faith groups or religious groups. I'm just giving an emphasis on Islam or Muslim because, well, I'm a Muslim myself, and that's the field of interest of my research. So in Indonesia, again, we still have, up till now, ethno-religious violence and conflicts. Just to recall your memories for those who have studied Indonesia, and to introduce to you who have not, there are some ethnic conflicts, Dayak and Madura in Kalimantan, and ethnic conflicts between Pribumi indigenous and non-indigenous in Solo, among others, Jakarta, in 98, for example. And religious-based conflicts or religious-inspired conflicts. between Muslim and Christian in Ambon, and also tensions within Muslim groups such as Ahmadiyya and mainstream Muslim groups. So when the reality of a multi-ethnic society and multi-religious society is not being managed well, we will get violence, riots, and conflicts based on the ethno-religious cleavages. And it shows that our approach and strategy in dealing with pluralism may have not been effective, and therefore we need to design alternative efforts to mitigate, to alleviate the tensions, the conflicts of violence in Indonesian societies, which hopefully will also inspire other plural societies in different regions. Here are the examples of Indonesian school children in various types of schools. You can see in the first picture Muslim primary students in Islamic school. On the right, you see Indonesian students in secular, the so-called secular or public schools. It's not affiliated with particular religion. It's sekolah negeri. Here at the bottom to the left, you see pesantren, Islamic boarding schools, and this one shown here is a modern pesantren, co-ed, girls and boys together, and all of them wearing jilbab as a obligation. At the center bottom, you see the so-called international school, usually attended by rich Indonesian in urban areas, and as you can see from the faces of the children, mostly they are from Chinese origin, Indonesian Chinese origins. And the last picture is a school in East Java. It's a Christian school. You see some Christian missionaries, and they are from Australia, briefing the students. So you see here, the schools also segregated. And in all of these schools, including the secular, the public schools, the non-religious schools, religious education are being taught as an obligation. So every student, whatever their religion is, should take religious education. Muslim students take Islamic education, Christian students take Christianity, and so on. And through our research, many research shown that these religious education are exclusive. Muslim students only being taught about Islam. Christian students are only being taught about Christianity, and so on. So you will see later that this increase the segregation within Indonesian society. We did our research in 2005, my colleague Zakiuddin Baidawi and myself, and we identified the characteristic of religious education and its implications. First, the existing religious education as it is now in Indonesia only introduced its own system of religion, and the result is a narrow system of knowledge among students' mind. Second, it does not recognize the other religions as genuine and authentic, with an implication that the students have a truth claim and salvation claim. Third, it ignores the otherness in religions and regards the other as inferior and infallible. This creates a sense of superiority, also prejudice, biases, and stereotypes. Fourth, it views the other religions and the world through its own religion's lens. This creates a myopic prism of the world. Fifth, extreme loyalty to own religious beliefs screens out outsider influence and existence, and it creates religious fanaticism and extremism. Lastly, its mentality of conversion or missionary is very powerful, among others creating religion's burden or obligation, sense of obligation of proselytism. And as I mentioned before, the values constructed by such religious education have sharpened prejudice and heightened demonization of one socio-religious group by another, and institutionalization of religious cleavages in terms of us and them. Interesting thing is that the majority of Indonesian population of all faiths still consider religious education as pivotal, as important in guiding children to have good morality, and it's true. But at the same time, there's a danger lurking behind this powerful agent of socialization when the content, the method of the religious education is dogmatic and segregated in nature. So this last consequence is the one that we need to tackle with if we want to create a more peaceful Indonesian society. Regarding Islam, many of us educators, parents, adult caretakers believe that the Islamic spirit of Rahmatan lil Alamin, that means spreading the blessings to all creatures in the universe, and also the spirit of Fastabiqul Khairat, fair competition in good deeds and good cause, still relevant to be taught to Indonesian Muslim students. So we'll see that this will be a base for Indonesian Islamic education. But how we teach Islamic education is something else that will come up shortly. I'll give you a brief information about Islamic schools, Islamic education in Indonesia. There are various types of schools. First, pesantren, Islamic boarding schools. In pesantren, they give about 10 to 14 hours of Islamic education per week. It's plenty. Pesantren is Islamic boarding schools, yeah. They started, the students started to learn the so-called ilmu umum, general sciences, since about 2 decades ago. Before, until 1970s, they only learn about religious subjects. And now still they have 10 to 14 hours per week for Islamic education. The history of Islam, Quran, Hadith, everything. The second type of Islamic schools is madrasah. Madrasah is not a boarding school, but it's based on Islamic education system. And in madrasah, students get 6 to 12 hours of Islamic education per week. And then there's Islamic affiliated schools like Sekolah Muhammadiyah. I come from Muhammadiyah organization, the second biggest Islamic organization in Indonesia, who runs about 6,000 schools in Indonesia. And Islamic affiliated schools affiliated to Muhammadiyah or to Al-Irshad, the Arabic community in Indonesia, would offer 4 to 6 hours per week of Islamic education to students. And in secular it's not actually totally secular, because in there, in secular schools, students get 2 hours of Islamic education. So we did research on the dynamics, the contents, and the impacts of Islamic education in Islamic junior high school in Solo. We would like to know for sure what's causing students, as perceived by many, to have prejudiced views on others. And we would like to know how to deal with this if we want to create a better, peaceful society. So the research was a qualitative. We use content analysis to analyze written materials, the books, curriculum of Islamic education. And we combine this method with semi-structured interviews. Also, we distributed questionnaires for teachers and students, as well as for principals. We also conducted focus group discussion with the teachers. We chose 4 schools as a sample to reflect diversity of Islamic education given in various schools. First is Madrasah Sanawiyah Negeri. It's a school managed by Ministry of Religious Affairs, MORA. We have 2 departments, national departments in our country that run schools. First is Ministry of Education, and second is Ministry of Religious Affairs. It's a complex story, but they run different schools. And this Madrasah Sanawiyah is run by MORA. It's non-boarding, public, considered public because it's organized or under auspices of MORA. Second is Madrasah Sanawiyah As-Salam. It's a boarding school. Students live in the compound of the school. It's private, run by a family, like traditional pesantren, but it's considered itself as a modern pesantren. The third is Muhammadiyah, SMP Muhammadiyah. It's also private because it's run by Muhammadiyah organization, non-boarding. And fourth is the only secular school, Sekolah Menengah Pertama Negeri 4. We interviewed 22 Islamic studies teachers and involved 120 Muslim students. This is the research questions. How issues of tolerance and respect for diversity and multiculturalism are addressed by teachers and Islamic studies, of Islamic education. Second, what are the perceptions and attitudes of students towards otherness and religious pluralism? And here are some of the findings. I'll skip this. In essence, this is about the result of the content analysis of the materials of Islamic education. We found that messages of peace, of respect are not found too significantly in the materials. If there's messages of peace, tolerance, respect, that's mostly addressed to other Muslim fellows, not other human beings, non-Muslim fellows. And there are some messages or principles who are promoted by Islam, but it's not found anywhere in there. For example, takrim, mutual respect, is not there. Sulh, reconciliation, is not there. Islah, or conflict resolution, and lin, non-violent, is not there. So this will serve as a basis when we later design a book for the students called Islamic-based peace education. If we are filling the gaps, we are filling the holes that we found not there for students. This is teachers' perceptions and attitudes about internal religious diversity within Islam. Teachers are more tolerant and respectful to different schools of thoughts or mazhabs within Islam, rather than to different faiths and religions. But they believe that when a particular mazhab is not in accordance with their interpretation of Quran and Hadith, the mazhab in question is then considered as heresy. And again, Ahmadiyya is an example of this. Many members of Ahmadi are still living in fear. Yeah? They live in a exclusive compound created by the government to prevent them being attacked by extremist Muslim groups. And in general, teachers say that curriculum is not enough in covering mazhabs, discussion about mazhabs. So even within religious internal diversity of Islam, there's not enough materials found in the teaching materials. Here, another result for teachers' attitudes on interfaith relations. The tolerant teachers are only few, only 28%, less than 30%. And there are intolerant teachers, making the majority of them, 70%. The former group, the minority, thinks that other faiths, religions should be acknowledged and respected for their existence and their teachings because they are all protected by Indonesian constitutions. Undang-Undang Dasar 1945. They believe that religious freedom is part of human rights. And the majority believe that Muslims' obligation to non-Muslim is to spread the message and mission of Islam. I think this is not exclusive to Islam. Other monotheistic religions also have a strong missionary spirit. Celebrating Christmas, when we ask about do you agree with celebrating or greeting, giving, saying greetings, Selamat Natal to Christians, they don't agree. They see it as haram, and they believe that when Muslim interact with non-Muslim, they have to bear their mission to proselytize them without force and violence, unless they said it is necessary to do so. So there's a question here: what kind of forces or causes they see as necessary to do violence? This is the result of students' attitudes. Students look better than teachers, but still it's worrisome. About a half of the students, when we ask how many non-Muslim friends, they said that they don't have non-Muslim friends. Those who have friends from non-Muslim groups, from non-Muslim communities, they cite reasons such as, I have never discriminated my friends based on their religions. Another said, all human beings are all the same, although different in religions. They are tolerant and kind, they are fun to be with. Another said, my horizon and knowledge are expanding by befriending with them. 35% of students do not have any friends, and 13.3% of students only have one non-Muslim friends. But look at their reasons. When they have non-Muslim friends, their reasons also interesting to notice. Some say no other reasons than that I just don't want to be friend with non-Muslims. This is for those who don't have anyone from non-Muslim friends. Some others say, I rarely met non-Muslims in my kampungs and in neighborhood, and also of course in their school, because their schools are exclusively for Muslims, so they don't get exposed to various faith groups. There is no non-Muslim in my schools, and some said that I only wanted to convert him or them into being a Muslim, and I succeeded. So see, the missionary spirit is still there very strongly. So based on this research, our own research, and also research by other organizations, such as from Universitas Islam Negeri, Islamic State University in Jakarta, in Ciputat. I think the organization's name is PPIM, Pusat Pengkajian Islam dan Masyarakat. They did their research later than us, 1 year later than us, and they found similar results. I think their results are even more worrisome. They found that 75% of Muslim teachers and students are intolerant, disagreeing with the building of the new church, disagreeing with saying Christmas greetings, etc. So based on these results from our research and also other research with similar results, we designed a book for for Muslim junior high school students entitled Islamic-Based Peace Education. And by saying Islamic-based peace education, we have a reason in doing this. There were two other projects sourcing their peace education book on human rights and also on UNESCO culture of peace. And they got a lot of rejections, protests from Muslim communities, saying that they are not basing their peace messages from Islamic tradition itself. So we are trying to source our book, our Islamic education on peace messages on Islam. I bring one book here. I don't know whether Charlie is also bringing another that I gave to the center, but I will circulate this if you want to look. These are examples. I will give some examples of some pages found in there. For example, Tauhid. In our first chapter, we discuss about Tauhid. And some of you familiar with the principle of Tauhid. It's traditionally interpreted as oneness of Godhead. But in our book, we further go that our belief in oneness of Godhead will have a consequence in our outlook, our worldview, seeing all humankind as one. So we are brothers and sisters, although we have different religions, because all humankind created by God, by one God. Tauhid adalah kesatuan kemanusiaan. So this is one example how we base our peace messages on Islamic principles. We did research. I'm not from Islamic studies background, but I managed to organize some colleagues from Muhammadiyah University who had solid credentials on Islamic studies. I should mention their names here. This project won't be here without their collaborations. For example, Fatah Santoso, Ahmad Fatah Santoso, Zakiuddin Badawi, Abdullah Ali, and Muhammad Toyibi. as you heard before, I'm just a psychologist, social psychologist, interested in peace building efforts. So I don't have enough knowledge about Islamic principles, Islamic studies. So I organized this within the center's projects, and this is the result. Tauhid, we have discussed it. Another example is Ummah. You have heard about Ummah. Hizbut Tahrir, for example, talks about Ummah as a pan-Islamic community. But we interpret Ummah differently, not out of the blue. For example, Tauhid, the principles of Tauhid that we mentioned before, it was derived from Ismail Faruqi's book. And Ismail al-Faruqi is respected as a Muslim scholar internationally. The Ummah, we define it as living together with all other humankinds, that everybody has equal access to be inhabitant of this universe, live side by side, and bind social ties in a group, community, and society, etc. Another principle in Islam, which is rarely being explored, not many Muslims know about this, is sulh or reconciliation. It has become Indonesian word also, islah. So when we did a conflict resolution in Ambon, for example, we used the word islah. It's the chosen way to assemble concepts of truth, mercy, and justice after violence was taken places. And you will see in the books there's a definition of the concept. There's a story derived from Islamic history or from prophet saying, or citations from the Quran with Arabic writings in it and its interpretation. So it's valid for the content of the books to be presented as Islamic education book. Another concept is aufun or maghfirah, forgiveness. Another one is husnuzan or positive thinking. This is an example of principle of tasamuh or tolerance. And here there's illustrations to make the book interesting for the students. In this page, particular page, we draw three different religious leaders: Christian, Muslim, and Buddhist monk. So tasamuh here is interpreted as to accept freedom of religion and expression, to means respect of differences and diversities of religions, cultural perspective, and ethnicities. Some other concepts, there are 17 principles or concepts in the book. Some others are ta'aruf or ihsan, which means co and pro-existence and altruism. Tafahum, mutual understanding. Another one is rahmah, which we translate as love, kasih sayang. And this is the illustration. In this page, as you can see, we draw women without veil, with an intention to give students that in reality, Muslim women are free to choose whether they want to wear hijab or not. And later it creates a controversy, but I will save that for later. And also in here, in another page, a Muslim young man gives water to a thirsty dog. In Islam, many Muslims regards a dog as haram. They don't want to touch or to befriend, to play with dogs. But in here, we deliberately choose this story, which was found in Islamic traditions. And the Prophet even mention the story of a prostitute giving water to a thirsty dog. But when we wanted to use that story, there was too much controversy, so we chose this version: a boy giving water to dog, not a prostitute. Another principle, al-musawah, means egalitarianism. For example, in here, as you can see, we cite a verse from Al-Hujurat, number 13, which interprets more or less, all humankind, we made you diverse peoples from men and women, and we made you in groups, in various tribes and nations, for you to get to know and to respect each other. Fairly, the nobles among you are those who do good deeds. So it doesn't say the nobles among you is Muslims or Arabs. So we stress this kind of verses from the Quran. The last example from the book is Lin, non-violence, which means action, saying, attitudes, behavior, various structures and systems that preserve and protect physical, mental, social, and environmental security and safety. And in here we give illustrations of the Prophet Muhammad when he was being attacked and almost killed by sword by his enemy. He didn't retaliate back. Instead, he forgave the attacker and make peace with him. So all these materials are found in Islamic traditions, values and principles, but they are not widely explored by Indonesian Muslim communities, and I think also by Muslim communities in other parts of the world. And this is one thing that we can do to improve the situation, the conditions of our society to be more peaceful, to be more in harmony with each other. But I would like to end my presentation by saying the peaceful community or society won't happen if this kind of efforts only done by Muslim groups. Other faith groups should do their parts also, because from many research we know that similar prejudice, intolerance also simmer or in fact burning the social relationship in plural societies. So I'm just giving an example of one effort done by a Muslim community in our city of Solo. I think I'll stop here and I will take your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Yahya. I think the presentation is very interesting, and then I think the research is a very good, an excellent efforts to bring peace to to all Indonesians. My question, and I agree with your closing remarks saying that this effort has to be done by other religious groups so that peace can be, can be with us in Indonesia. Now, and the book is I'm holding the book right now. I think it's the content is also very good, because as you said, it's tried to bring the gaps, that was not taught, in Islamic education, and now you want to fill the gaps. My question is, so this book is printed in 2009. So has it been used by the high schools in Indonesia, and is it only for Islamic-based, junior high schools? And then what are the responses from various Islamic organizations in Indonesia, like maybe the school boards, and is it approved by the Minister of Religions, Affairs?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can I answer this
Please, yeah.
first? I mean, before taking others. So the book was written by a collaboration of teachers of Islamic education from the 4 partner schools I mentioned before, with our center's Muslim scholars. The 3 names I mentioned before, Fatah Santosa, Abdullah Ali, and Zakiuddin Baidawi. So the teachers and the schools feel belong about the book, and we made a report to the schools. Some of the schools were reluctant with the idea. They question us with provocative questions like, who is your sponsor? Is Western behind your project? Are you funded by the American government, by the CIA to ruin Islam from within? Things like that. In fact, this is funded not by the American government. It's funded by Australian government and New Zealand, same Western countries. but the idea was totally mine. I mean, the Australian embassy in Jakarta asked me, I heard about your previous project. What do you want to do now? Is there anything I can help? And I said, I have one thing that I've been wanting to do. So this is what I want to do. And they didn't change a thing. They just provide the facilities, if you will, because we don't have resources, we don't have financial resources to run this, and this is an expensive project as it's not supported by Indonesian government. But anyhow, we try to make this project from the bottom up. We don't want to act like scholars, academia, who know better than school teachers and students. So we collaborated from the beginning. And by far, these books have only been tried out in the 4 partner schools. You're asking about the reaction. The answer would be maybe not too surprising for those of you who know Indonesia very well. Well, you heard about Majelis Ulama Indonesia, how they, for example, issued fatwa on banning strengthening of the hair, banning ojek, banning, the most serious issue, banning pluralism, secularism, and liberalism. And Majelis Ulama Indonesia in Solo, being Solo is a more conservative city than other cities in Indonesia, didn't like the book at all. So they spotted our project. Actually, our center have been in their radar very closely. And when we launched this project in the 4 schools, they watch carefully, and then they make this a big issue. For example, the Tawhid principle that I mentioned, they said that we are spreading heresy because it's not the way Islam interprets Tawhid. Tawhid is only for Muslims. Other faith groups, non-Muslim groups who don't recognize Allah as the only God, then they are infidels, they are kafirs. So they see the content of our book as insulting to Islam, and they press our rector to ban and burn the book. So it was a busy year last year for me and my colleagues dealing with MUI Solo. And MUI Solo was not acting alone. They were influenced by extremist Islamic groups such as Majelis Mujahidin, Front Pembela Islam, again defending Islam as Islam or God needs defending. So our reaction to those reactions, we can choose to counter them totally, but we don't see it as productive. Living in Solo, we understand the characteristic of Solo society. When things like this happening, then they will just shrivel down, and then feeling fear to participate in such project. So we try to, instead of lashing back to them or criticizing them, we conducted dialogue with MUI and its proponents, facilitated by Muhammadiyah chair, Muhammadiyah President, National Chair of Muhammadiyah, Pak Din Samsudin. And the dialogue was successful in terms of that the MUI members and also other Muslim groups presented in the dialogue couldn't give more arguments criticizing the book as a heresy. But then, until now, they are still trying to report the book to the Mahkamah Konstitusi. And I'm not sure what they are doing now, but we are still carrying out the project. Yeah, we take some of their suggestions, but we don't take some others. For example, they want all the women in the books to wear hijab, and we argued with them that there are multiple interpretations about hijab. They gave suggestion that the word all humankinds from Allah to be replaced by all humankinds are created by Allah in the Tawhid chapter, and that we will take, because we see that it's not a big deal, a big difference between the word from and created. But for a more fundamental principles like treating other human beings, or whether regardless of their sexes, religion, ethnicities, we don't bargain with them. We say to them that this is the correct Islamic principle supported by various Muslim scholars like Ismail Al-Faruqi or Muhammad Abdu. We can, my colleagues who are from Islamic studies background could give them, solid arguments, and they didn't give argument back. So that's the situation right now, and this year we will conduct a strategic meeting with MORA, with Departemen Agama and Departemen Pendidikan, National Ministry of Education, to discuss the book, because we want to bring this book to the next level of policymakers. Last year, it was a grassroots efforts, and we want to show that we have something to show you to Ministry of Education and Religious Affairs. And I think the reception so far are very good. So in May this year, we will conduct that meeting, and hopefully this book, after being revised, it will be distributed to junior high schools in Indonesia. Another, yes?
Thank you, Ibu Yaya, for a very wonderful talk, and also for the work that you're doing. I had two questions that might be interrelated, and you could feel free to just answer one. The first was, as you're thinking about how to appeal to this younger generation, in designing the book, have you kind of appealed to any of the the kind of gaul, more hip, either phrases or pop figures within Indonesian society to try and give some other kind of, to almost make tolerance and pluralism, I guess although pluralism is a more dangerous word to use there, more of a kind of a hip sense of being cool there. I don't know, would it be like Ta'aruf Choi or something? Has that entered into the design of the book? And then second, as I was looking through the book, it was really interesting to see one of the pages on urging the youth to discuss the film Laskar Pelangi. And maybe you could tell me a little bit more about that, because I think as I think about that book, that film, or even Ayat Ayat Cinta, in that one scene where the protagonist is on the bus in Cairo and defends the two Americans, and it was very much an instance, if you remember from the film, of pluralism and of giving rights to a non-Muslim. So I guess those two kind of questions: how have you tried to appeal with the youth, and then also the second, do you know how any of the students who have maybe perhaps watched that film Laskar Pelangi together and discussed it, do you see that as a potential, or any interesting insights from that specific example? Thank you.
Yes, you are correct. We noticed from examining the printed materials of the Islamic education subjects that the books were presented in a very bland manner, very boring. They fall asleep on their books, yeah. So we invited, when we designed the book, we invited, for example, Hernowo from Mizan Publishing. He's very good in writing books for teenagers, and many of his books become bestseller for youngsters in Indonesia. So this is one example on how we try to make the book interesting for young Muslim students, yeah, and we use informal language in the book. I don't have the book now, so I cannot pinpoint the page. But for example, it used the word kamu. Apakah kamu sudah memahami? That's very unusual for school books to say that. And Laskar Pelangi, when we did the tryout for classrooms with this book, many of them actually already saw the movie. It's a big hit movie. But when we present the Laskar Pelangi by exploring the pluralistic sides of it, yeah, and discussing differences, how Muslim how do you say it, protagonists in there befriend and even fall in love with a Chinese girl, yeah, things like that. The students love it. And in our, how do you say it, post evaluation, it shows that their views, their outlooks on religious diversity increased significantly, and also for teachers. We did series of meetings with teachers, including training of teachers, because this book cannot be delivered to the students without training the teachers on how to use the book, and first of all, on how to have a tolerant, respectful outlook for religious and ethnic diversities in Indonesia. So we did a lot of stuff during the course of 1 year, yeah. And I think from the result of evaluations of both teachers and students, we are hopeful that this will be the way to go for Indonesian school children's. And I hope that the Ministry of Education and also the Ministry of Religious Affairs are true to themselves, to their conscience, not being influenced by Islamic radical groups who press to reject this book based on their political interests. Yeah. So this is we are actually doing something delicate and controversial, because this area has become a battleground for ideological wars in Indonesia. But it's necessary to do so.
You pointed out that all the religious groups do their religious education separately. And I was intrigued by the idea, and maybe you've already answered it in a sense, talking about the difficulties you've faced already. But the possibilities, what would the possibilities be of having a multi-religious group having education that would look at all the religions from their own perspectives? Is that even a possibility?
Well, it has been done by various NGOs with youth groups, but not in formal schools. Not many in informal schools doing this because of the fear of the teachers, principals, school committee, those people in school yayasan, foundation of the schools, that they are losing their how do you say it, popularity within the community, considering that Muslim communities are still conservative, yeah. But efforts start to be done on this ground. For example, again influenced by NGOs or women's wing in Islamic organizations such as Muhammadiyah, who initiated an effort for interfaith dialogue in schools. But again, this is only started to roll on now, and usually the interfaith dialogues in school takes place in universities, not in high school or junior high school, let alone primary schools. Their arguments of rejecting the interfaith project in the school is that they fear that when the children are still young, they will be influenced by other religions. So let's give children a strong foundation of their religion first before they are ready to speak, to discuss, to relate, to be friend with people of other faiths. So there are still much need to do this, but we activists or scholars interested in doing this, well, some of us try to be considerate, to be strategic, not to invite controversy, because once the controversy explodes, then usually the project just crumble down. For example, the movement of liberal Islam in Indonesia, it's important, it's necessary, but when we did this, we always get labeled as the proponents or the antek kaki tangan of JIL, Jaringan Islam Liberal, and we are not getting any inspiration from Islamic liberal networks. Yeah, we do our own within Muhammadiyah based on various encounters with different faith groups, and the community who feed on those labelings that we are doing, expanding Western agenda to ruin Islam, they will just, reject the idea. So we're doing this very carefully, to say the least, not to make Muslim communities fear or uncomfortable with this kind of new idea. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could speculate on what historical factors have contributed to the conservatism of the Muslim community in Indonesia. They seem to feel embattled and threatened, and that they have to dig in to assert their beliefs, even though, as you point out, so many of the important principles in Islam seem to be contradicted by their everyday fatwas or statements.
I don't know whether I can answer that. I'm not historian, but from my own observation, well, Aji maybe can help me answering that. But from my observations, for instance, when I notice how Indonesian Muslim communities become more conservative than well, in the 80s or in the 70s, I think the international factors play a part in here. Well, the revivalism of Islam all over the world at the same time with the Iranian Revolution and the post-colonial struggles in Indonesia, yeah, to improve their own society after the independence from Western colonizations, and just the grievances emanating from imbalances in international arena between the North and the South, the West and the East, including Islam, and how the U.S. and other Western countries take Muslim communities, especially after the demise of Soviet Union, of communism, taking Muslim as a new threat, a green threat. I think all of these contribute to the defense mechanism, I would say, of Muslim communities to guard on their principles and to see Islam as a resolution of the problem that they cannot solve for a long time. They see Islam as a panacea, perhaps, to heal all the wrongdoings in the world, because democracy they see as failed in guaranteeing the just and peaceful world community. But that's only one explanation if we talk about history. I don't know, any other who wants to comment on this difficult question for me? Thank you.
I think you give a comparative comparison with Malaysia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that aside from the global issues in Malaysia, there is the internal problems as well. The bit slightly different because the non-Muslim population in Indonesia and Malaysia, in terms of percentages, are different. But there's a very, very strong internal dynamic in Malaysia with regards to the Chinese population and differences in socio-economic, political processes. And so, well, on the one hand, there is a great majority of Muslims there, 60-70%, compared to Indonesia, which is even larger. There is a continuing and sort of never-ending fear that the Malay, and then in this case, Indonesian language, and the Muslims will somehow be taken over by the economically more powerful Chinese, and that no matter what you do in terms of social engineering, the Chinese will always have more and will always want to take over, even though this is actually really not true. That that they don't have any desire to take over, and that so that numbers are also engineered. That when you end up when the Malay Muslims have become quite elevated in society, the government will continue to engineer the numbers so that to show that the Muslims are still very much oppressed. So I'm just sort of comparing to the global situation that in most countries, including Indonesia, there will be very strong local dynamics. Yeah.
Yeah.
Terima kasih, Bu, for this wonderful talk. I really appreciate coming here and giving this speech, as well as all the work that you do. I was wondering about the secular schools that you worked with and interviewed. That here it says, well, that you mentioned only had 2 hours a week of Islamic education, and you considered multi-faith. Assuming that there are, I guess, I was wondering what the results of from this multi-faith school would be, you mentioned how 72% of the teachers are intolerant. How do those percentages look in the multi-faith school or the secular school, as well as how does that percentage compared out for the students? And I'm assuming that because it's a multi-faith, there will be people from other faiths as well coming into the school. And so I was wondering what their interaction, the interaction between Muslim students as well as non-Muslim, between Muslim and non-Muslim students are in those schools.
Yep, thank you. When we began our project by approaching the schools, we thought that we would face opposition or rejection from Islamic school, but we were wrong. The strongest rejection was from secular school, Islamic teachers, to be precise. Those were the ones who asked me, who's funding you? Are you trying to ruin Islam from within? What is your real agendas behind this? Those came from Islamic teachers in secular school, not from pesantren or Islamic schools. Yeah. And we were surprised, and we had discussion on why is this. So one of our thoughts was that perhaps because secular schools are easily being penetrated by extreme Muslim groups or conservative Islamic parties, especially PKS. They infiltrated to many schools, including secular schools, to advance their agenda of making Indonesian society Islamic society with Sharia as a strong foundation of the daily life of an Indonesian societal life. So PKS, for example, succeeded in getting into secular schools and also Muhammadiyah schools. They form usroh, for example, student discussions. And you will see in Indonesia that secular schools have their Muslim girls, students, female students wearing hijab increasingly in their numbers. Yeah, in Islamic schools, they wear hijab in the schools, but outside the schools they sometimes take them off. Yeah, but in secular school, it's interesting to notice these trends. The teachers, whether they are teaching Islamic subject or secular subject as math, history, and others, the numbers of female teachers wearing hijab in secular school also increase. So I don't know whether this is answering your question, but similar with this line, the Islamic teachers from the secular schools also hold more conservative principles regarding various issues, including issues about pluralism, respecting differences. I think the explanation, one of the explanations is that when Islamic teachers in Islamic affiliated schools, Islamic teachers in Islamic affiliated schools get more exposures and get more credentials in their Islamic studies and get updated by their Islamic leaders or Islamic scholars, yeah. While in secular schools, they are more confined in their own places, I guess. But this maybe perplex us to also notice that many of the proponents of Islamic militant groups are actually not studying Islam well. They are not from Islamic studies background. Hizbut Tahrir leader, for example, he's a friend of mine from college in Gajah Mada University. He studied geology. Others also studied engineering and everything else aside from Islamic studies. So that maybe explains, as we would like to say, that when one really studies Quran and Islam very well, then they won't be a violent or intolerant person. They won't be a intolerant Muslim, yeah? They would be a peaceful Muslim, because that's how Islam teaches its adherents. So, I don't know. I hope it answers or not. So you can explore more. Thank you.